We are now in the year 2025, which means it's a new year, also meaning a fresh new start. I've never really been one of those that has a New Year's resolution. However, I am someone that recognizes patterns and would like to fix the bad ones. So going into this new year, I want to be careful of what I buy or even sell. When it comes to purchasing video games, I tend to think of the more expensive or popular games I want. Usually, these are games that are widely praised and in turn creates more demand for said games. This can create a problem: price gouging. In retail, this is a pretty common practice. If there's a lot of demand, then people will be more likely to pay a bit extra for that product. So color me shocked when I sell my copy of Casper on the SNES to then come back days later for a browse and see the same copy in a glass case for $200. They only gave me $10 for it. I mean, how many people are begging for a copy of Casper for the Super Nintendo? Anyway, you came here for the collecting aspect, not my financial woes. Video game collecting is the most exciting and liberating thing ever in my humble opinion. I was collecting before I was able to actually start collecting them myself. Seeing others talk about their video games on the internet made me feel like I experienced them too. Watching YouTubers like the Angry Video Game Nerd discuss these old relics of the past only made me more excited to build my own library of games. I'd take mental notes of which games are good and which ones to avoid. This didn't last long as I bought some of the bad ones despite the several YouTube critic warnings. That's the thing about this side of entertainment. While most modern games that are bad really are terrible, those older ones have a certain charm to them. Shadow the Hedgehog may be a complete mess, though it's not unplayable, nor was it a bad idea despite the cynical critics. Say what you will about that game, ever since Sonic 3 the movie was announced, Shadow the Hedgehog has been banished to the glass case at retro stores near me. How about Final Fantasy VIII? After FF7, people expected the world, and that just wasn't possible. It's often a title that gets overshadowed by its previous successor. Sure, the junction and mechanic is stupid, but the story and characters were just as good if not better than the one right before it.
Oh brother, this guy stinks!
My point is, some games that receive a bad rep from the fans and critics doesn't entirely label these games as not worthy of owning. Heck, I own Final Fantasy VII physically, whereas 8 is just a stupid little icon on my desktop. Now, does that mean you should buy Bubsy 3D based on what I just said? No, you shouldn't.
I just did something involuntary.
Collecting just to collect isn't really the right way to go about it. And collecting the expensive games just because they are expensive is also missing the point. What makes our collections so special is that they are catered to us. Sure, a few weird games might find their way into our library, but that's what makes it unique. You can almost tell who somebody might be like just by their taste in games. To a normal person, this may all sound pretty stupid, yet all hobbies are like that to an outsider. At some point, collecting actually started to get stale for me, which is not really a good sign for a hobby. I'm not even that old, and here I am feeling a bit down about the thought of buying more games. I couldn't really point to what made me feel this way. Could it have been the friends I had at the time? Or was it the pandemic that skyrocketed the prices of games all over? Either way, I eventually got out of it when I got the Xbox Series X a couple Christmases ago. In order to understand why that's important, we have to rewind a bit. I got the PS5 on launch day and had the Nintendo Switch the same year it came out as well. While I had a blast with the Switch, my PS5 was just kinda there. Don't get me wrong, I was excited to play and own it, but the honeymoon phase wore off quicker than any other console had before. It could be that this is all I have for it. Up until this point, I had been a PlayStation fanboy for years, even though I owned other consoles like the 360 and every Nintendo under the sun. But for some reason, when I got the new Xbox Series X, a new door had been opened. And that reason was backwards compatibility. So many games that I've never played, like Dark Souls, South Park: The Stick of Truth, BioShock 2, and Midnight Club LA were now games I owned. Then there were games I never heard of, like Star Wars Episode 3 and Dead of Rights. Sure, Dead of Rights might be pretty mediocre, but I didn't know that when buying, which was kinda half the fun for me. Trying to find a hidden gem amongst these older titles was really exciting, plus it was one of the few last games made by Namco before the merge. Having this is like owning a piece of history. Yes, I know those games were also on consoles that I owned at the time. Despite that, however, my gaming journey was a pretty narrow one. My home consisted of Nintendo games that were released throughout the years, while my PlayStation library was pretty much whatever my father had at the time. Of course, I was dragged into Goodwill stores and ended up getting most of my retro library from there, but collecting wasn't really something I thought of. It was just more games that I had now that I didn't have before. When I found out Xbox was backwards compatible, I was happy to know one of the big three was finally doing something to preserve these older titles. Other than the backwards compatibility, the other thing that made these older Xbox games even more exciting to collect were its pricing. Pretty much since its inception, the Xbox brand has been the laughingstock in gaming. They tried so hard to even appeal to the birthplace of video games, but couldn't even make a dent. The Japanese audience just weren't interested. Who could blame them? They don't have very many exclusives and had even fewer at the start. Now, for the most part, the Xbox version of a game is pretty cheaper than its competitors. This goes especially for the original Xbox. It just makes a collector like me enjoy it even more. It's practically a free market. Speaking of market, if you really want to get more bang for your buck, you should check out video game market websites. These will help you in determining the price it goes for and when might be a good time to buy it. I use this to see whether or not I'm getting a good price at the store I'm in. The hardest part is when to say no to a game that's already in your hand. You can also try buying on eBay, but it does have its sketchy sellers. One time I ended up with a copy of Borderlands 2 that had the red ring of death on it. Thankfully, I got my money back. I didn't let that stop me from buying more things off of eBay, but there's a reason why I like buying in person. Buying video games in person is a lot more personal. You get to see the condition of the disc as well as the case it'll spend the rest of its life in. Which brings me to cover art. For many years, and even to this day, I am very adamant with the games having their original box art and manual. Nothing turns me off more than seeing a game case with just the name written in Sharpie on a corporate slapdash cover. GameCube games are the worst offenders as they weren't meant to be put in a regular DVD case. But in recent times, I've been a tad lenient on box art. I still hate the cheap DVD cases. In my Rayman Origins video, I specifically bought a copy that didn't have its original, well, anything. Had I known the story was all in the manual, I wouldn't have, but that's besides the point. Rayman Origins wasn't a game I particularly had any attachment to, yet I couldn't just leave it in the lifeless case. So I made my own cover art for the game. Drawing and creating my own cover for a game was really fun. To my knowledge, this is the only one I drew for. The others I did were either the same cover but a different region, or just a silly little mock-up that makes no sense. Cover art and whether or not you should buy complete in-box games could honestly be its own topic. There is one last thing I want to talk about before I end this video. Other regional versions, specifically the Japanese games. The Japanese versions have a lower value here in the States, solely for the fact that we can't read them. Games like JRPGs really rely on you to read in order to progress. Not only that, but you also need that region's console to play, in most cases. The cool thing is that the game is now cheaper. You just gotta walk around blind and start clicking things until something happens. For the region lock, a simple fix would be to grab a clone console like the one I have here. Usually these have a couple slots for various retro consoles, so you don't need to have your originals plugged in all at once. Personally, I've never seen a copy of Mega Man X, but I did find a copy of Rockman X, which is the Japanese version. The American copy usually sells close to $30, but I got the Japanese cartridge for $10 I think. I even found this cool Dragon Ball game that same day. I don't really know how to play it, but it's a cool little addition nonetheless. I've sold and gotten rid of some games on my journey. I'm not really happy that I did, but what's done is done. The ones that have stayed are the ones that I cherish the most. Some may be a silly little splurge like this Sonic & Knuckles, but regret would be a strong word. If it wasn't in my collection, then it would feel a little empty. Then there's my most valuable game that holds more of a personal value than a monetary one. My Japanese import of Super Smash Bros. On the Nintendo 64, complete in box and all. I already have the loose American release, but the Japanese box has always been my favorite over the two. This is what collecting is about. Owning your favorite video games no matter the condition. Going out of your way to own the opposite region just cause it looks cool. Or spending lots of money on these amazing relics so you can be a part of history. Just for our future generation to sell it all.